Okay. Okay, Sarah. Amazing. Oh my goodness. All righty. I think we got it now. Yeah, like I said, between my power going out and I had to readjust Chrome actually went out on me. I had to bring all of that back, get permissions to get into the Zoom. They want your correct school address and all that. That's a lot of information. All right. Okay, so take a break. This is a short video on succession, and then I'll let you get back to finishing up whatever you need to finish up. Um, and this is our review for succession. So what you did on the worksheet is great. That gave you a chance to be interactive with that. And so this is going to just review the topic, primary and secondary succession. It may help you answer some of your questions as well on the worksheet. There we go.
Who succeeded George Bush Sr.?
Okay.
That was Bill.
Hold on, it went backwards.
Logical succession and discuss primary versus secondary succession. So let's get started. You know, what does succession even mean? Let's use another example first. If I were to ask you what president succeeded Jimmy Carter, I hope you would know, oh, that was Ronald Reagan. Who succeeded Ronald Reagan? That was George Bush Sr. Who succeeded George Bush Sr.? That was Bill Clinton. Who succeeded Bill Clinton? That was George Bush Jr. Who succeeded George Bush? That was Barack Obama. And who succeeded Barack Obama? we have Donald Trump. So in this example, secede means to follow, and that's what secession means. We're going to keep that in mind as we go through this. So let's look at primary secession. The definition is pretty straightforward. It's the establishment and the development of an ecosystem in an uninhabited area. So here's an uninhabited area. And what happens is this ecosystem is going to go through a series of changes. So small life begins to grow, and then a little bigger, and then a little bigger, and then a little bigger. How does this gradual series of changes occur within this environment? That's what this video is going to discuss. So when it comes to primary secession, there's really two modes in which this is going to occur, and that's through volcanic lava creating new land. Here's an area. Let's add some plants and let's add some animals, and let's say in the background of this area there's an erupting volcano. And as time goes by, this volcano is erupting, the lava is flowing into the ocean, and it starts to pile up and pile up and pile up and pile up. Eventually this lava is going to cool and harden. And when this lava cools and it hardens into new barren land. Now this land, this rock, it's not going to stay barren forever. It's going to go through primary secession, and we'll talk about that in just a few moments. Here we have a picture of some lava flowing into a body of water, probably into an ocean. And eventually this lava is going to cool and solidify, and eventually you can walk around on it. And eventually this will turn into, a wilderness ecosystem. Well, another way in which primary secession can proceed is through glacial retreat. Here we have a frozen glacier, and as the seasons change and the temperatures of this planet are warming up, this glacier is retreating, and when it does, it exposes new barren land. Now, the land is barren currently, but after primary secession, we're going to see a wilderness ecosystem begin to grow and live in this area. Here's a great picture from 1909, taken from a glacier in Alaska. Watch how the picture changes almost 100 years later. Notice how the glacier has retreated, and the barren rock is actually very full of green vegetation in this picture. So how does this process occur? Well, let's start with actually the volcano example. Let's use here's some lava flowing into an ocean. And eventually this lava is going to cool and harden into rock or land. And here again we have the rock has hardened, the lava has hardened, and it's barren. It looks like a vast barren wasteland right now. So the first organisms to inhabit this barren rocky world are what are called pioneer species. Now, if I ask you what's a pioneer? Well, here's an example. Lewis and Clark were European pioneers that first explored westward across America all the way to the west coast of California.
Looks like trouble in paradise as the hottest festival of the year has flamed out.
Alexander Fleming, Sir Alexander Fleming, was a pioneer in medicine. He helped to develop the first ever antibiotic called penicillin. And Elvis Presley was a pioneer in rock and roll. These three examples nicely show what a pioneer is. They're one of the firsts to come along. And in this case, pioneer species are the first organisms to inhabit this new land. Now, I'm not talking about the people in the picture. I'm talking about other organisms that encounter this area and begin to grow. So what organisms are even capable of growing in a vast wasteland? Well, moss would be one. Here's a picture of moss growing on a rock, and lichen is another. Lichen is a mixture of a bacteria, a algae-like bacteria, and a fungus living together mutually. But these two organisms are able to grow and live on barren rock. And
so pause it right there. This is a typical, the things the way he's presenting is a typical of the way you have to remember that there are two, there's a science meaning to a word, and there's a generic word meaning to the word. So pioneer species doesn't mean the first people who inhabited the area, but it gives you an idea of what pioneer means. Right now, you need to remember moss and lichen. Those are pioneer. So what are examples of pioneer species? So if you're going to write it down, write it down. Examples of pioneer species are moss and lichen. They would be the first things to grow in an area that had no vegetation at all.
Moss and lichen are commonly called pioneer species because they can live in this environment where other organisms just can't. And so if we look at this rocky land here, how do the moss and lichen get into this newly created piece of land here? Well, through the wind. As wind and rain and weather will carry the reproductive cells of moss and lichen, their spores, and they're carried through the wind and eventually, and carried through rain, and eventually they settle in this area here, and then they begin to grow. And so lichen and moss actually come in these real pretty colors. Here's some white and reds. Here's some kind of yellowish greens. Here's some kind of lime green colors. So I'm going to illustrate moss and lichen in my animation here with the gold, the red, the green squiggly lines. Those are moss and lichen that are growing on this barren wasteland of an environment right here. Well, as time passes, moss live, reproduce, and die. Lichens live, reproduce, and die, and their dead matter accumulates, as do pieces of crumbling rock. So over time, this accumulation of dead organic matter from moss and lichen and the crumbling of rocks forms a real thin layer of soil. Not enough soil for big old trees and redwood trees and oak trees and things like that to grow, but enough to stimulate the production of even more moss and lichen. And so what was once a vast rocky barren wasteland is slowly starting to show signs of life. And so as the process continues, eventually seeds are going to enter this area and begin to grow. Now, how do the seeds get there? Well, one way is through birds. Birds will eat fruit and then poop out the seeds. And as they fly overhead and they poop out their seeds, the seeds land in this new area. Another way, many seeds are transported via wind. Many seeds have little blades on them that help them catch the wind and glide and travel vast distances. And so here come some seeds that just entered. And now that the seeds have entered this new land, the seeds begin to grow. The seeds begin to grow into small flowers and small shrubs, and over time, as flowers, lose their petals, as these shrubs shed their leaves, all of this accumulates on the ground and adds even more thickness to the soil. And so as time passes, the flowers reproduce, the shrubs reproduce. Again, there's another flower reproducing. And as time passes, the layer of soil becomes even thicker because you have years and years and years now of growth just accumulating through flower petals and decaying leaves and moss and lichen decaying, rocks crumbling and adding to the soil. And so with this new environment come animals. Animals, of course, are always looking for new habitats, new areas to hide from their predators and new food sources. And wherever there's herbivores, you better believe carnivores are going to follow in search of prey. So what was once a rocky, barren wasteland is slowly developing into a thriving ecosystem. And as even more time passes, small trees begin to take root. Again, how do the seeds get there? Well, through wind and through bird droppings. And so small trees over the decades begin to grow in this area. And that adds even more thickness to the soil because, again, now you got another few decades of moss and lichen accumulating, another few decades of flower petals and leaves and rocks crumbling, and now you have mouse droppings and snake droppings, and all this adds to the thickness of the soil, which allows even taller plant life to begin to grow. And of course, Where there's more vegetation and more plants, there's more habitats for animals. So birds might now migrate into this area, and insects might take advantage. And let's say a little squirrel migrates and runs up into this tree here. And eventually we reach the climax community. Notice how the soil became even thicker, because as the decades go by, more and more organic matter accumulates. More and more soil accumulates on the ground, and larger trees begin to take root. How do the seeds get there? Wind carries them, rain carries the seeds, bird droppings carry the seeds. And over time, you get these massive, huge, tall canopy trees. And sadly, these tall canopy trees will often outcompete and overcrowd some of the original vegetation that was there. And now that these tall canopy trees are blocking all the sunlight, you start to see some of the death of the ground level vegetation. And this is characteristic of a climax community. And of course, this bigger trees and bigger habitats allows even more animals to inhabit this forest. So bunnies and rabbits come along, and owls fly in. And so now we have a thriving ecosystem where, let's say, maybe 100, 150, 200 years ago, this might have been just barren, a barren wasteland, barren rock. So that was primary succession. Now let's start with secondary succession. So it's a change that takes place after a disturbance occurs in an established ecosystem. So here's our climax community that we just finished talking about. And let's say a disturbance happens. Maybe it's a forest fire, a flood, some type of disturbance. And in this case, we're going to show you that the secondary succession process is just much faster because the soil still exists. So in this case here we have a lightning strike, and it starts a fire, and oh man, we have this wildfire, and of course birds are going to fly away, and whatever animals can run away. And eventually, this fire is going to spread, and eventually could be the death to some of these trees here. And eventually, as time goes by, as fuel runs low, eventually the fire goes out. Well, once the fire is out, notice how the soil still remains. So secondary succession is going to reestablish this ecosystem. So as time passes, grasses begin to grow. Again, seeds drift in the wind and through rain and through the droppings of animals. And eventually small shrubs and bushes and flowers will begin to regrow. And eventually trees will regrow. And wildlife will come back and reoccupy this area. This is secondary succession. And eventually we come back to our climax community where, because the trees are so tall and dense, they actually might crowd out some of the smaller vegetation. The ecosystem has reestablished itself after this disturbance. That's secondary succession. Here's a real nice series of pictures that were taken that nicely show secondary succession after a forest fire. So this picture right here was taken 1 year after this fire was extinguished. Well, now here's the same area 2 years after the fire. Here's the area 3 years after. 4 years after. Notice how the ecosystem is reestablishing itself. Here's 5 years after. 6 years after. 7 years after. 8 years after. You see, as time passes, more and more and more growth accumulates, and as time continues, this environment will be reestablished, and that's secondary succession. Another example of secondary succession is like when a tree falls. When a tree falls in a forest, that leaves a big gap in the canopy, and that gap is a resource for other trees, because if you can grow and occupy that gap, you have access to sunlight. And so as a tree falls through the act of secondary succession, other organisms will reoccupy and fill in that gap. And it might be a different species of tree, it could be the same species of tree, but eventually that gap gets filled in and the ecosystem is reestablished. There's some real interesting examples of secondary succession. Here's a picture of the town Pripyat in Ukraine, which is the location of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which experienced a nuclear meltdown in 1986. So this city's been abandoned since 1986. And you can see in the plaza here, plants and vegetation are beginning to grow. Plants are overgrowing in all areas. And the ecosystem is beginning to regrow and reestablish itself after years of human neglect. Speaking of neglect, here we have urban decay, and here's a picture in New Jersey. Again, you can see in areas that aren't well maintained, you can see the sidewalk is crumbling and plants are beginning to break through, and life and the life in this once ecosystem is trying to reestablish itself. If I'm not careful, I can get sucked into Wikipedia and read about these all day, abandoned farms and ghost town. Here's a farm that was abandoned. At one time, this farm was cultivated and had crops, but after being abandoned and neglected, the ecosystem began to reestablish itself in this area here. So there you have it, primary versus secondary succession. If you're in my biology class, pause the video and try these and let me check.
All right, but you're not. So we're going to stop it right there. All right, so the nicely illustrated difference between primary and secondary succession. With secondary succession, you need to remember that it happens quickly because the soil is already established. What makes primary succession take so long is that you have no soil. So you have to create soil. So that's what those pioneer species do. They create the soil. Okay. All right, I'm going to stop sharing because if I switch back, you'll be in my grade book and you don't want to see that. So just remember those things of vocabulary and note the difference between primary and secondary succession. All of the terms that he used, like pioneer species and the moss and the lichen, and understand why one happens and which one is faster. Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop talking. So the time that's left, go ahead and finish turning in whatever you need to turn in, those of you who need to do so. Gabrielle, I will check on that. And study. Go back and look at those units and study those again. Always look at the first module and look at the last one. The last one that says no, before you go, know the following. That's what you need to look at. Okay? Okay. Alrighty. All right, so for the succession activity with from the website, remember to send me a screenshot of your final score, and it'll tell you the score. Hopefully because you've completed the worksheets, it should say 100, 100 and the score on your quiz. Hopefully. And I'm talking about the one that says submit your score to your teacher. That's what you're going to screenshot. And folks, I do have a big problem with the fact that when I look at GoGuardian, some of you are not doing anything, and y'all are the ones whose assignments are not in. And then next week, you're going to want to throw in everything at the last minute, and I'm just going to mark it late. So if you turn in late work, it will be graded late. Understand that. Chance, did I ever take care of you? Let me look at yours right now. Where- Yes, Jayla. Go right ahead. Which assignment? The one that you're working on now, Katie? Okay. Sherrod, I think this may help you as well. Somebody asked me to send the link. So I'm going to send it to everybody. All right, so Sherrod, that should take you. Let me see what it does when I click on it. All right, so that takes you where Katie, I think hopefully that will help what you asked for. Because the link took me to the assignment. And anybody else who says they can't find the assignment or the worksheet or whatever, I just put a link in the chat and that should take you right there. You have to download it into Kami. Save it in Kami. Yeah, Gabrielle said open the file in Kami. Thank you, Gabrielle. Save it in Kami. You have to tell it to open in. Thank you so much, Gabrielle. All right, Sherrod, you saw that? You saw that? And again, it helps when you all share that because it's different for me. That's not how I would have downloaded it. I don't have Cami. So that's not how I would have downloaded. So um, it is helpful when you all share how you can do this. And I also want to say, some of you send me your Cami link, which is okay, but you can also save it as a PDF and send me your PDF. But if you have to save it as a Cami link, that's okay. Because now I've just got a way to open that link, but before I didn't have access to your school system's Cami. I do now. So it's okay both ways. If you're not able to save it as a PDF, send me the link, and it's allowing me to open it. Okay. Attendance real quick before y'all leave me. Your apps. All right, folks, and I want to give you another heads up. I frequently do attendance midway through class or towards the end of class. If you pop in thinking that you've logged in and you're present and then you leave, like a couple of you do, you might get marked absent. So don't do that. Stay this. You're supposed to be in this class. Stay to this end of class. And I also might add that the people who pop out are typically the people who owe me some work. So again, not going to have a lot of sympathy for late work for folks who are popping in and popping out. Because you do have class time to get this done. All right. Okay, Justin, what did it say that for? Mm, all right. Remember, you need to send me both the screenshot of your score at the end of the activity and your worksheet. Um, Alyssa, I think I'm missing your screenshot. Okay, got it, got it, got it. Um, okay, good, Justin. Got it. I don't know why. Folks, if it's saying late, don't worry about it. It's not late. I don't know why it's doing that. Oh, okay. Got it, got it. It is due today, actually, but tomorrow is good too. I think it's available until the 30th, but it's due today, which means it'll be late after today. All right. Anthony, you sent the worksheet, no screenshot. Jayla, you sent a screenshot. Oh, okay, and that's not what, do I need to hit resubmit? Jayla Marshall, do I need to? Yeah, because that's not the right score page. Okay, don't forget the worksheet. No, all that was in the submission box was that screenshot for the other teacher. All right, Jayla, give me a second to look at that again. Are you not able to send it in the gradebook folder? Because it's still showing me the same thing. Hold on, let me. Because what it's doing is making me down. Yes, please resubmit. I think I hit the resubmit button, so please send it there. But I did get it in my email, so I do have that much. Just send the worksheet. I think I'll try to now that I had to download this, I'll try to upload it to you. Mhm. Yeah, when y'all send me stuff to my email, it makes me download it like it's a picture. I'm trying to limit the things that I have to download. All right, so that's yours. Okay, let me come on back here. All right, we got a few minutes left. Anybody else have questions, things that you desperately need me to address before you go? All right, so Chance, I got your screenshot in my email, but I don't have a worksheet. Yes, it is time to go, folks. It is 11:25. Actually, it's 11:26. So, like I said, if you have no questions for me, you are more than welcome to log out. Have a wonderful weekend. See